Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. We know there are many events going on at this time, so we're really grateful that you've decided to join our one. I'm Simon O'Connell, I'm the CEO of SNV, and I'm delighted to be the moderator for this afternoon's session. The title is Resilience: Unlocking Climate Finance for Communities in Fragile and Conflict-Affected Situations. And ladies and gentlemen, friends, the theme really is communities in these fragile and conflict-affected situations are most seriously and increasingly significantly affected by the climate crisis. We want to shine a light on that, and we want to explore what the options are to mitigate the effects of the crises and in fact the protracted crises in these contexts. I want to highlight the climate peace link in particular. There was a report out just a couple of months ago, the new agenda for peace. It was published in July, and it really underscores the deep connections between peace, climate, and security. We want to inject a bit of urgency into the discussions. Looking forward to our panelists certainly helping us to do that, because we know that the climate realities in these contexts are indeed increasingly severe, and the trends are not heading in a positive direction for many. We also want to highlight the impact on the most vulnerable populations. Of course, the climate crisis in those fragile and conflict-affected situations is indeed affecting the most vulnerable, and an astonishing 600 million people plus live in these contexts outside of the human climate niche. So this is a large-scale problem, and a problem, frankly, that impacts not only on the people living in those environments, but on all of us. We've got some wonderful panelists. As I said, I represent SMV. I'm joined alongside by International Alert's country director. Both our organizations operate at increasingly large scale in some of these fragile and conflict-affected situations, and we are indeed adopting, I think it's fair to say, Emmy, increasing digital tools and technologies and working at scale, but we want to increase that scale. So we're looking forward to hearing your perspective from International Alert in particular. And we need that adaptation and that focus on resilience, don't we? But of course, it's this scaling element that is so urgent, and that's in particular where we want to focus our discussion. We also don't want to lose sight of the importance of a rights-based approach, locally led initiatives, not everything driven from here in the UAE or in The Hague, where I'm based, but locally led initiatives, and really ensuring that community members themselves are at the forefront of this transition. So we've got a wonderful panelist. I'm not going to go on. My name, as I said, is Simon O'Connell. If I'm not so good at pronouncing any of your names, please forgive me and call me whatever you want in return. But before we head to our panelists, I'm hoping we are going to indeed have some keywords from David Murphy. David, you're the Deputy Director, Climate Unit, Department of Foreign Affairs. So David's going to set the scene for us, and welcome, David. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Simon, and thanks to SNV and to your partners for organising this important event. Distinguished guests, good evening. I hope you're having a productive COP. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panellists shortly, but before that, I'd like to say something about the current context, including from Ireland's perspective. Warnings from the IPCC on climate change are ever starker, and we can see with our own eyes the changes taking place. Weather events are becoming more extreme, and extreme weather events are becoming more commonplace. The impacts can be felt all over the world, but it is those who are most vulnerable, including those in fragile and conflict-affected situations, who are on the front line. We need look no further than the Horn of Africa. While communities are struggling to recover from the worst drought in 40 years, El Niño-induced floods have brought death, destruction, and displacement across Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. More regular and more extreme weather events leave vulnerable communities with no time to recover. These devastating climate impacts must be met with an improved international finance system of climate finance that supports those most affected. The system must empower those furthest behind to prepare, adapt, and build back better from climate events. The reality is that countries and communities in fragile and conflict-affected situations, often those facing the greatest climate risks, continue to face significant barriers to accessing public and private finance. Ireland believes that we urgently need to scale up and improve climate finance to highly vulnerable countries on the front lines of climate change. Finance and action which is inclusive and responsive to different contexts is critical. For example, we know that communities and states affected by fragility, conflict, and instability are acutely vulnerable to climate impacts. Adaptation action must be prioritised in these contexts to break the cycle of mutually reinforcing conflict and climate risks. It is estimated that only 10% of global climate funds currently reach the local level, which imposes serious constraints on adaptation efforts. Increasing the proportion of adaptation finance that reaches the local level is a key priority for Ireland in our climate finance and diplomacy. We also know that the more fragile a country is, the less climate finance it has received from bilateral funders and multilateral climate funds. Between 2010 and 2018, more than half of the countries in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa received less adaptation finance per person than the average for least developing countries, despite their clearly urgent needs. It is also important that links are made between climate, peace and security and broader climate finance conversations, and that is part of what we are doing here today. Why is Ireland interested in this? Well, Ireland's overall development policy is focused on reaching the furthest behind first. Climate action is a pillar of this policy, and so we place a special focus on addressing climate change in the most vulnerable contexts. We are in the process of doubling Ireland's climate finance to 225 million per year by 2025, and so we are working with partners to scale up work being done on the ground. We commit to deploy this increased climate finance to support, in an inclusive way, communities who did least to contribute to, but who are most impacted by climate change. Ireland also maintains a special focus on peace, and this was the perspective that we took on climate and security issues throughout our time on the United Nations Security Council in 2021 and 2022. We think it is important here to remember that climate change is not just a threat for security, climate action can also be an opportunity for peace. So that is why Ireland supports partners with climate financing, which will be focused on the most fragile contexts. This has been a consistent priority for Ireland, and we are pleased to be supporting International Alert with their project, Powering Peace Through Climate Action, which brings together climate action and peace-building approaches in climate-vulnerable and conflict-affected contexts. I'm sure Emmy will outline progress there. Support for loss and damage is another key priority for Ireland as it relates to supporting the furthest behind first and responding to severe climate impacts. And Ireland was active in negotiations on the Transitional Committee. Again, our focus was on the most vulnerable, including fragile and conflict-affected areas. Ireland pledged a 25 million contribution to the new Loss and Damage Fund on Saturday, the second highest per capita donation to date, after UAE. At COP, some of the signs are encouraging. Last year, the COP27 presidency made climate responses for sustaining peace a signature initiative, and the COP28 presidency built on this focus, and yesterday marked the first thematic day at a COP for relief, recovery and peace. A charter on finance and managing risks was launched by the presidency and REAP. Ireland endorsed it, particularly its objective to ensure better use of finance to manage risks and protect people in the most vulnerable countries from climate-related disasters. Yesterday, over 70 countries and 40 organisations endorsed the Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace. One of the key objectives committed to in this declaration is to enhance the financial support for climate adaptation and resilience in situations of fragility, conflict, or severe humanitarian needs. And of course, the Loss and Damage Agreement, which I mentioned earlier, is an important part of this conversation too. As our Taoiseach said on Saturday, we must do everything in our power to make the transition just, protecting the vulnerable and leaving nobody behind. Happily, the decision was adopted early and the process of capitalisation began immediately. Ireland looks forward to the swift disbursement of funds to support the most vulnerable to respond to the impacts of loss and damage. I'm looking forward to the panel's interventions. There is a growing awareness of the challenges and a growing library of important risk assessments. But what is interesting about today's session is that the panelists will be sharing evidence of possible solutions at community level. Through adopting a comprehensive and inclusive approach that prioritizes prevention, resilience, international cooperation, and conflict resolution, we can still have a future where peace and security thrive alongside a sustainable and resilient planet. Thank you.
So thank you so much, David, and great to hear Ireland really at the forefront of some of these hugely important initiatives. And of course, I'm sure I speak for all of us in welcoming Ireland to also encourage some of those other donor partners to step up along similar lines. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're hoping now that time zones, technology, languages are going to work for us. And I'm hoping online we have Soraya Vanini Tupinamba, who is a fisheries engineer from the Federal University of Chiara. She's the coordinator of the project Hand in Hand, We Create a Current, Strengthen Coastal Populations in the Struggle for Socio-Environmental and Climate Justice. And that's in partnership with the Terama Institute, SOAPE Forum, and PACS, funded by the European Union. So very much hoping, Soraya, you can hear me and that you're with us. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, this segment will be in Portuguese. So you should have headsets on your chairs. Soraya, can I check that you can hear me and that you're with us? Sorry? No? Okay, I think we may be having a little bit of technical challenge, which is fine, because we'll just go with the flow and very much hope that Soraya will make it back with us shortly. So I'm going to just open up the conversation. We've agreed amongst the panelists we're going to try and have a good, open, interactive conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Stephanie Speck, if I may. Stephanie, you're the head of communications at the Green Climate Fund, a huge, huge global fund. And I think we'd love to hear, Stephanie, what do we need to do then to get more tailored, adaptive, and accessible finance to fragile and conflict-affected situations?
Thanks, Simon, and thank you to everyone for this invitation. It's really great to talk about this topic. It's that intersection between climate and conflict is not only professionally critically important to me, but also personally critically important. I grew up in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, and we lived at altitude, and our school was built on the only flat ground for miles around. And so every tribal intervention that occurred on our school oval, which we loved, actually, because after the fighting had finished, we would go out and collect all the bows and arrows and continue the fight after school. And since that time, I've had the privilege of living and working in many fragile and conflict-affected states: Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, Syria, and a few others. So this is something that I've reflected on personally and professionally, and it's good to represent the investment funds on this panel. We know that fragile states have the most to lose in this situation. We know that half of the countries least prepared to adapt to climate change are already affected by conflict, and we know that in many of those countries, LDCs and SIDS, particularly within that band, receive as little as $2 per capita in climate finance. The Green Climate Fund, we're the largest multilateral climate investment fund, and we were established as a financing mechanism at the Paris Agreement. We are one of those funds set up to receive the $100 billion that the developed world promised to the developing world. We've had a recent capitalisation round, and we now have about $33 billion as of this morning. Thank you, Italy and the US, over the last couple of days, as well as other donors. And we have about around 13.5 billion deployed currently or in approved projects. And 1.5 billion, sorry for all the numbers, but I'm just giving you the pictures at the moment. $1.5 billion is currently spread across 33 of 36 countries or territories that are classified as fragile. So we have skin in the game. And more than having skin in the game currently, our new Executive Director, Mafalda Duarte, who was appointed about 4 months ago, is really targeting the opportunities that come from investing in the most vulnerable places and the most vulnerable communities within those places. Today we launched a $250 million partnership with Acumen. It's called Hardest to Reach, and it's going to operate in 16 countries across Africa, including Chad, Niger, DRC and Somalia, and it's about bringing electricity to those most vulnerable communities. So we are not afraid to go where others have not gone before. But we also do that with some level of humility, because we know that this is quite a complex space and not a lot is known about how we operate best, particularly in that adaptation and resilience building landscape. We know that, in fact, huge levels of resilience. When I landed in Somalia in 2013, I thought, who are we as the development donor community to talk about resilience in an environment that is so clearly ultra resilient? For the private sector to continue functioning in 25 years of a failed state to in fact grow demonstrates extraordinary resilience in some pockets. So we know that actually there's a lot that we don't know. The things that we think are essential at this point in time to get it right: one, patience, of course, and an understanding of calculated risk. So many low-income countries, as we all know, have extraordinarily low credit ratings, right? The good thing about GCF is that doesn't deter us. We have a really strong approach to risk-sharing capacity that other funders lack. So we can take first loss positions, and we're able to offer long-term concessional finance. So patience and calculated risk. The second thing is robust safeguards are essential. We know that we need to assess how existing conflicts may affect how we deploy investments, and we need to make sure that the new investment we're putting into countries and markets doesn't exacerbate or start new conflict. We know we need to be incredibly gender responsive. The voices of women, and it's great to see so many women talking today, are incredibly important for us. So before any project is signed off or approved by our board, there is a gender-responsive action plan that needs to be incorporated in that, and that is particularly looking at giving women a voice in that decision-making context. And we have a comprehensive Indigenous peoples policy that ensures the rights of marginalised and vulnerable groups are upheld. And the fourth thing is, we know that we need to grow. We need to be patient, we need to take risks, we need to make sure we have robust safeguards, we need to listen to the most vulnerable, but we must grow. And so the promise that we've made in our latest strategic plan is to double the investment that we give to direct access entities. They are not the big, huge multi-development banks or multilateral partners. They are the companies on the ground or organisations on the ground, direct access entities. So we don't take just the most to lose perspective at the Green Climate Fund, we take also the most to gain perspective. We know that with the right finance and the right partnerships, we can overcome immense barriers to build peaceful, inclusive societies, and we're up for the challenge.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We might come back to some of that a little bit later, because of course the Green Climate Fund is a vast fund, and a fund which is continuing to evolve, as you just announced, with that exciting new initiative with Acumen. I'm going to turn, if I may, now to Emmy Alma, the International Alert Country Director from Kenya, so a real practitioner, Emmy, if I can say so, on the ground there. So Emmy, as we delve further into these issues around the intersection of climate action, finance, and conflict sensitivity, what's your advice to the donor communities, how they contribute to countries, and how can they better navigate this very complex landscape?
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you for having me on this panel. Yesterday, when the launch of the declaration was going on, as a practitioner, what kept going on in my mind was the work now really should begin. And as everybody talked about, this issue of the interlinkages and connections no longer being a question that we are trying to answer, but something that is a reality that we have to deal with. again, I was reminded of the conversations I've had in the past with people asking, especially as a peace-building organization that has had the privilege of working on climate action and integrating our experiences and lessons in the peace-building sector. And because most of the questions have been, so how do we take this forward? How do we do this? And after the declaration, again, I spoke to a global coordinator for a big, one of the largest humanitarian and development organizations. And she said, we've been recently doing an assessment around our work in fragile contexts. And the person that was doing the evaluation said, I can see issues of relief. I can see issues of recovery. I don't see the conflicts and the conflict sensitivity work or peace building work in this. And she was like, this is one of the lessons that I take. And so I think I consider this a responsibility for us to be able to define better and more what needs to be taken. And so I was really glad that I have an opportunity to speak to this as a practitioner. And one of the first things that I think it is important to recognize, especially for donors and contributors, is that this should be seen as an opportunity. It is complex, yes, but it is an opportunity. One, because our experience shows that it provides working and ensuring that climate financing and climate action is conflict sensitive and that peace integration is realized is an entry point for working with different and divided communities. It's basically a neutral entry point. For those who work on peace building, I'm sure you've had things like peace dividends and how do we have conversations with people that have been affected for so long, talk about things without necessarily focusing on their divisions, focusing on the things that tear them apart. And so climate action is that opportunity that can get us to respond to this question that we have been asking ourselves. Why does peace remain so elusive in this context? Why is it that we can't get it right? And I think this is an opportunity to get it right. And from the experiences that we have in some of the programs that we've been implementing, including one that has been referred to by David up in the north, which is one of the most conflict-affected contexts, this is a reality that we see on the ground. And so investing in conflict sensitivity and the practice of it at every level is also a sure way. A lot of conversations have happened around anticipatory action and early warning, but also taking it to the next level around early response. And we say, and from the experience that we see in our work, that it is a way to institute anticipatory action. It is a way to work around response in ways that also speaks to the intergroup relationships, because all that affect our communities have a lot to do with the relationships that exist. And so if our early warning, early response can think not just about the impact as we see them on infrastructure, on the various things that we respond to, but also on the intergroup relationships, then we can actually take that step forward. And so what are the key considerations from our experience and what we do? One is that as programs are designed and as we think about signing this off, especially for the donors, that conflict sensitivity, just as has been said about gender, conflict sensitivity, conflict analysis, and a proper understanding of the context from the very beginning has to be a core part of how programs, especially climate action programs, are designed. Number two is that because this work happens, and we do know that climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation activities, the things that these particular programs seek to address are usually the very things that drive conflicts in the conflict-affected areas. So think about water, think about rangelands, think about even large-scale investments, including those that are around green energy transitions. These are the things that drive conflict. And so if we are implementing we are financing for climate action, then we have to think about are these interventions establishing the preconditions for peace in this context? And so then if we can answer that question in our program design, in the things that we tick off as we work around what needs to be done, then the donors and the contributors, I believe, will get it right. And I just want to give you an example of some of the processes and the projects that we've been able to work alongside. One is a huge program within the Kenya that is led by the Kenya government through the Treasury. It's called FLOCA, Financing Locally Led Climate Action. I think it is considered in the region as a flagship climate finance project. And a lot has been done, especially on, it has two phases. It has an institutional phase, and then it has a resilience building phase. So in this institutional phase is about county governments. So in Kenya, we have 48 governments, if I can call it that. We have the national government, and then we have 47 county governments. And so part of the institutional building work is about the county governments, that is the local governments, being able to develop climate change adaptation plans within the counties. Now, this has happened. There has been participatory processes. However, one of the things that remains a gap is that the social context has not necessarily been part of how this is designed. The fact that resources are utilized across counties and also countries like Kenya and Uganda is not necessarily part of the climate change adaptation actions. And so if the conflict-sensitive lens is not part of this process, then you realize that the adaptation plans, the restoration of rangelands, a lot of money going into that, reseeding programs around the pasture are happening, but then will it be sustainable? Will it work if these are the very resources that communities are conflicting about or fighting about, and yet they cannot develop consensus about these resources? And so part of the projects we are doing is trying to raise consciousness around, it is not just about adaptation plans, it's about how do these adaptation plans respond to the context and establish those preconditions for peace in those localities. And the other one that I want to refer to is one that is just being championed now by the president, which is it's called the National Climate Change Readiness Program. It's largely around tree planting, but looking at that as a way to deal with a lot of challenges. And the questions we've asked around this, it's a big program, good program, but the questions that remain, and I think these are questions that can be asked in every other country, that even if the national administration structures are instructed to be able to do the necessary, plans that are to be established, like the tree growth planting and so on, if these communities are displaced, if they cannot live within their locations because their locations are insecure, if they cannot speak to each other across the counties, then we will plant trees, but we will not grow trees. And so we have to think about growing these trees. And that means that people have to be present, people have to speak to each other, people have to develop consensus, people have to agree about how this affects them. And I think the final one I want to say in relation to this is therefore that the structuring for climate finance has to seek to achieve integration across sectors and consensus across communities. That also means diversifying the financing mechanisms, because we all don't see things the same way, we see things differently. And we have seen that in our accompaniment of FLOCA, that the things that we see are not the same things that our counterparts are not seeing. Not because they don't want to see them, it's just that we are not designed to think that way, because there are things that we prioritize. And so, and the most important one is that local communities have to be given the ability and supported to use the capacities that they have to take us to the next level. This requires flexibility, this requires planning for risks, this requires removing some of the barriers that we have seen that make it impossible for locally led action to take off. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmy, very much. I'm just going to try and see if we've managed to get Soraya back online. No? No? Okay, so unfortunately Soraya is unable to be with us. Please let me know if she does manage, Soraya, and if you can hear me, if you can manage to connect and hear me, indeed. So turning to our next speaker then, Pirawan Wongnithisathaporn. Warm welcome to you from Thailand, a member of the IIPFCC, which is the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change. And Pirawan, if I may, as we discuss this crucial shift towards a rights-based approach in climate financing with a focus on centering on indigenous peoples for direct access to that funding, I think, Emmy, that local point that you were just starting to make there, what recommendations do you have what offers can be made for building bridges between those traditional climate finance mechanisms and the unique needs and perspectives of indigenous peoples and communities?
Thank you, Simon, and you read my last name correctly. Congratulations. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My Thai name is Pirawan, but I also have my own indigenous name, Pokime, which means the flowers. That is grown in the rotational farming and is resilient to the drought. Before I'm touching on the recommendation, how do we ensure that? For us, we see funding or financial, the money is as one tool to reach to protect this, our natural resources, no? What we are into to protect this earth. But apart from the fuel that you put in the gas, in the car, you need also a good car, a good driver, and a good road. So I may not looking only the fuel, and I don't know when is the fuel will come to me also. So indigenous people, we start to, we've been walking, no? Walking, talking, and acting. So we're not waiting. We already doing something to protect that natural resources, to ensure that our people still able to live, survive to our young generation, and not only our people, but for the world as well. And I think number of research has mentioned that 80% of biodiversity remain in our traditional land. And I think you know that already, I don't have to inform. But just to imagine 80% there in our land and territories. And I remember one of our donors asking me like, you have to ensure that you use the money efficiently. And then I was thinking, the 80% there that remain because of our action is still not enough evidence that how we contribute. We're not requesting for the EAT fund, no? We've been doing that. And we also not begging for it. But our action show you already that is the effective way that we already show to you. But why you still asking so many reports, so many monitoring framework to us? Like you can see in your eyes already, what is there, the remain there that for everyone to enjoy together. And only the financial is not enough. You have to put human rights-based approach in the center. I come from the region that 2/3 of indigenous people living there. But only 5 countries recognize the term of indigenous people. And our land, territory, and resources, very low, no recognized. I think it's only 8% that been recognized for the customary land right in Asia. And that's why the conflict is ongoing. When you not safeguard our rights, that's why the conflict can happen. And even the war is happening right now is because of natural resources that happening in our region. So if you really put the first step to ensure the human right, indigenous people right at the start, and including us in the decision making, maybe we can work together as a prevention. The finance may not cost this much if we're doing that first step correctly. So since the first step, you have to make sure that you step in the right step together, because the climate change has no boundary. It affects every one of us. And for us, we cannot wait for the raindrop. We have to take action. My people dying every day, not only because of climate. We lack of food security, but not only because of climate, but the policy that taking away our resilience. It takes us our right to participate in political decision making. The design of the project or the plan on adaptation, mitigation, or loss estimate, we never be part of that. Even at the global level, I try to enter the room. I cannot. They look at my flag. No, madam, you cannot enter. Even I want to observe and to listen what is our government try to make decision, whether they talk about indigenous people or not. They want to keep the money, but they don't ask me what I want to use that money for. I may hungry, but it doesn't mean you have to give me the rice. You may give me the tool, the seed, or other thing that I can continue my living and continue my value, that how I seeing the thing. We not seeing things silo, climate change, biodiversity. No, this thing is part of our life. Land is our life. River is our blood. And we cannot calculate that into money. Okay, so let me stop there. What we can improve together, let me take on that. Indigenous people have the right to self-determination. That means we should be part of decision. We should decide together that how you ensure that this plan and action is practical and it meets my needs. The priority of the community is different. We cannot see things like one blanket and you apply it to all. No. We are so diverse. Even my language, our language is more than 5,000 language, you imagine. Like we have so many language. And the needs is so different and diverse. So we cannot just use one practice or one action to apply to all. So we have to consider that. And number of times the project come from the top to down. Then I have to develop proposal just meet the need of the donor. I cannot. My people need other things. And then that means, okay, you cannot apply because you are not eligible, you are that. And sometimes the design also, only this region or specific country, it cannot work that way. The nature is all connected. You cannot protect only this region and allow another region to get violated. It's all connected. You cannot save only the Borneo. You cannot save only the Amazon. You have to save everyone together, because you cannot making the fence from the tiger only one. You have to make the fence together, because when you fencing here, the tiger will attack another area already. So that is how the wildlife attack our life. But just give the scenario, like we cannot do like just focus in certain, and the conflict areas sometimes you also cannot, because the donor afraid that they will lose the money, and they also afraid of the political conflict like that, no? But if your agenda really to see the human life, those money you lost doesn't count the life that we lost. It cannot recover our culture and knowledge. There are things that money cannot compensate. And we still arguing like who will give the money. And we still argue who manage the money. And the people is dying every day. And we still talking on this.
So Piran, just to come in and to pick up on that, and Stephanie, you warned me, or you kindly told me I can ask you anything, so I will take this space and give it to Piran, if I may. Piran, you're sitting next to somebody from the Green Climate Fund, Stephanie. David is sitting down at the end of the table. Concretely, this is unscripted, by the way.
Okay.
Concretely,
Okay.
how do we, because we've heard this for years, what's the mechanism that you need to take the theoretical into the practical so that you have more voice and more space?
Sure. First thing, we need the governance that includes the indigenous people in the seat. So you ensure that our voice is already there, not just as by the stakeholder, but as the rights holder. We have to sit there at the decision making. So that's one thing. And then the prioritize everything. It should be bottom up, not from the top down. That we really need. And we want you to help capacity building, not only for us indigenous people, but also to the state and to the private sector, to understand what are indigenous people rights. because they keep violating our rights. And our government are mandatory, to protect and promote human rights. That is, our country have to do that. Because our government signed so many treaties, human rights, climate change, environment, everything, but it's not implemented. So we should have the monitoring body that also can monitoring, and you should ensure that our country using the money effectively also and go directly to indigenous people. And it would be the best if you create direct access fund to indigenous people. And we've been calling for the direct access for indigenous people. If you can creating that, and please consider the role of indigenous women. We want gender responsive and also not see us as vulnerability, but as the key agent of change. Not that is really needed for the women. And don't see us like cannot manage the fund. We cannot manage the fund because sometimes your regulation is blocking us. So provide more flexibility so that we can work together and be partnership with indigenous people. And tonight we're going to launch the indigenous people solidarity fund. So that is where donor can come and already can support directly to indigenous people. You may not to discard anymore. If you have any, you just give directly. That if you go directly to the indigenous people and community. So that one.
Thank you, Pero. Thank you. I think I can see Stephanie writing furiously there. So what we'll do for process, we'll go to our next speaker, and then Stephanie will come back to you to give you some space to respond, and then we'll open up for questions, and then we have some concluding remarks. Thank you very much, Peron. So moving along down the panel, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Amadou Diko, the State Minister from the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal and Fishery Resources from Burkina Faso. I'm sure many of us in the room recognize that Burkina Faso is a beautiful country and a country that is also experiencing some challenges around conflict. So, Dr. Amadou, State Minister, we'd love to hear a bit about the context in your country and what you think, what is your perspective around this and what you think needs to happen. Thank you.
Okay, d'accord. Merci bien. Bonsoir à tous. I'm going in French because I come from a French-speaking country.
Je suis désolé, je pense qu'on n'a pas la traduction pour tout le monde.
Okay.
We may have somebody very kind and willing in the audience who may wish to translate. Jean de Matter, Nick, Haley, Jean, maybe Jean from the either of you two, if you would like to translate. Let's do that. Okay.
No, I mean we translate in
Non,
French.
ça marche pas. Ils vont faire la traduction pour vous.
Okay.
It's in Portuguese, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. C'est en portugais, en fait, donc il n'y a pas en français.
Non, il y en a en français, j'écoutais.
Non, ça marche pas.
Ah, ça marche pas.
Ok. Ok. Voilà. Ça marche.
Yeah.
Monsieur le ministre.
D'accord. Donc, bonsoir à tous. J'aimerais d'abord remercier la SNV pour l'invitation. C'est un honneur pour le Burkina Faso d'être là ce soir. Et également, j'aimerais remercier le gouvernement néerlandais pour tout ce qu'il fait pour les États du Sahel dans le cadre de la lutte contre les changements climatiques. Et également appeler l'ensemble des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre pour qu'ils rejoignent l'Alliance pour le biodisaster en Afrique de l'Ouest. C'est vraiment un plaisir et un honneur d'être là ce soir. Et je suis ce soir avec des praticiennes qui parlent vraiment avec le cœur. Je pense que c'est vraiment apprécié. Les deux dames précédentes ont vraiment parlé avec le cœur. Et merci beaucoup pour votre engagement. Maintenant, quels sont les freins qui limitent l'accès aux produits et services d'adaptation à l'énergie renouvelable au Burkina Faso? Il faut dire que le Burkina Faso, c'est un pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et actuellement, nous avons deux grands challenges, c'est-à-dire le changement climatique et l'insécurité. du fait du changement climatique, nous sommes dans des pays où les pluies sont devenues irrégulières et pas bien réparties dans le temps. Nous sommes également dans des pays où l'énergie utilisée dans les foyers, 86% de l'énergie utilisée vient du bois de chauffe. C'est-à-dire que les populations sont obligées de couper les arbres pour pouvoir avoir l'énergie dans les familles, ce qui fait que de plus en plus, nous subissons les effets du changement climatique qui se manifestent surtout par le déplacement des populations et par l'insécurité alimentaire. Il faut dire également que depuis 2015, nous sommes dans l'œil du cyclone du terrorisme international qui se manifeste au Burkina Faso, au Mali, au Niger. Et ce terrorisme fait qu'il y a plusieurs populations qui se déplacent, qui laissent les villages, et il y a des fortes concentrations de population maintenant en ville, ce qui fait qu'actuellement, dans ces zones d'accueil, il y a des problèmes alimentaires, il y a le vol du bétail, le déplacement du bétail vers les pays côtiers, et je parle ce que nous faisons au niveau du biodigesteur. Vous savez, lorsque dans nos pays, le biodigesteur, on utilise la fumée des bovins pour faire le biodigesteur. Mais là, avec le déplacement des bovins et le vol de bovins, nous avons de moins en moins de fumée pour faire des biodigesteurs. Maintenant, quelles sont les actions que nous entreprenons au niveau national? Il faut dire que le Burkina Faso a ratifié l'ensemble des conventions internationales en lien avec le climat et participe aux rencontres internationales. Au niveau national également, au plan stratégique, le pays s'est engagé à promouvoir les politiques en lien avec la préservation de l'environnement et des ressources naturelles. Cela se manifeste par l'adoption des textes juridiques pour la promotion des énergies renouvelables qui occupent une place de choix dans la contribution déterminée au niveau national. Il y a aussi la création d'une agence au Burkina Faso, l'Agence des énergies renouvelables et de l'efficacité énergétique. Donc, le Burkina Faso a également contribué à la mise en place de l'Alliance biodigesteur en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre, qui regroupe actuellement 8 pays et qui sont fortement aidés par la SNV. Maintenant, les actions prises au niveau opérationnel, on dit que nous avons mis en place une technologie bas carbone, qui est la technologie du biodigesteur, qui permet au gouvernement d'atteindre les objectifs de développement durable, ainsi que les contributions déterminées au niveau national. Le biodigesteur permet aux exploitants agricoles de produire du gaz pour la cuisine et également pour l'éclairage. Et le biodigesteur également permet d'avoir des engrais biologiques de qualité. J'espère que vous aurez l'occasion un jour de voir un biodigesteur dans une campagne. C'est vraiment un outil de résilience qui aide les communautés à devenir de plus en plus stables. Donc, au Burkina Faso, nous avons pu installer plus de 17 000 biodigesteurs, mais il y a un potentiel de 1 800 000 biodigesteurs que nous pouvons installer. Et également, à partir de ce programme biodigesteur, nous avons pu formuler un projet qui nous permet aujourd'hui de vendre le crédit carbone et de mobiliser aussi des ressources des fonds carbone. Donc, l'acquisition de la technologie du biodigesteur, c'est assez coûteux pour les paysans qui vivent en milieu rural, ce qui fait que le gouvernement burkinabé s'est engagé à subventionner la mise en place de ces biodigesteurs et accompagné par ses partenaires. Donc, nonobstant les efforts entrepris par le gouvernement, les besoins de communauté restent encore non couverts. Il y a plusieurs défis à relever afin que la technologie du biodigesteur puisse vraiment aider les populations de nos pays. Et parmi ces défis, il y a la faible capacité financière des ménages qui limite la demande. Et le biodigesteur au Burkina, pour installer un biodigesteur, il faut autour de $300. Le gouvernement s'est engagé à payer les $150. Mais malgré cela, le gap qui est là, les populations, vu leur niveau de revenu, n'arrivent pas à combler ce gap pour avoir cette technologie. Il y a le nombre limité également de l'offre. On a moins d'entreprises qui sont capables aujourd'hui de mettre en œuvre la technologie. Il y a la faible capacité financière et organisationnelle de ces entreprises. et l'insuffisance des capacités techniques pour la mobilisation des fonds climat. Maintenant, comment accompagner les efforts du Burkina pour une mise à l'échelle de la technologie de biodigesteurs? Pensons qu'il faut faire la promotion des solutions basées sur le marché à travers la mobilisation du financement pour la mise à l'échelle des biodigesteurs, mettre en place un mécanisme de financement du marché des biodigesteurs dans l'espace de l'Alliance Biodigesteurs Afrique de l'Ouest, Afrique centrale, et renforcer les capacités techniques et financières de l'Alliance pour soutenir la dynamique du marché dans les différents pays. Donc, globalement, nous disons que la technologie de biodigesteurs qui est promue au Burkina, nous avons plus de 17 000 actuellement qu'on a mis en place. C'est un vrai outil de résilience. Peut-être que dans la salle, beaucoup ne connaissent pas le biodigesteur, mais ça serait bien de checker, regarder qu'est-ce qu'un biodigesteur. Ça aide vraiment les populations en milieu rural. Donc, nous invitons l'ensemble des partenaires à agir ensemble dans une synergie d'action afin que nous puissions aider l'ensemble de ces populations qui vivent dans des milieux fragilisés. Des milieux fragilisés par le changement climatique et de plus en plus par l'insécurité depuis les années 2015. Mais nous travaillons au niveau du gouvernement pour lutter contre cette insécurité afin que les populations puissent repartir. De plus en plus de populations repartent dans les villages. Mais ces types de technologies nous permettront de les aider encore à renforcer leur résilience et à rester dans les milieux naturels. Je vous remercie. Je voulais juste partager l'expérience du Burkina Faso en matière de biodigesteurs. Encore, merci à vous.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. So thank you so much for helping us to better understand both the challenges and the opportunities within the context of Burkina Faso, and also for shining some light on those extraordinarily impactful biodigesters. As promised, Stephanie, I will come back to you to give you the opportunity to respond to Pirawan's points, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we will open up to the floor, and I believe there are some online questions that I'm hoping will be relayed to me. But Stephanie first.
I did think you were also roping in David, but happy to be in the hot seat. We should be in the hot seat more often, I think. I think, firstly, I'm very grateful for your honesty and the integrity you display in telling in sharing these things. Yesterday, or the day before, I lose track, we're at COP, who knows what day it is. Mafalda and I went to visit the president of Somalia, with whom I used to work, and he said, we were talking about this very, very issue around countries determining what they need rather than investment funds or donors or consulting companies even. And he said it's very simple. If someone comes to you holding the hand of a Somali, it's from us. And if there's no Somali in the room, it's not from us. And I think this is the critical thing. The first point you started with, Pirawan, about the seat at the table is really important. I think the Green Climate Fund, and I'm not speaking out of school here because Mafalda has been very public on this in the 4 months that she's been leading us. We have huge resources that have been gifted to us by a tax-paying public of the countries many of us come from. And we are the stewards of those resources, and we have not stewarded them as well as we ought. And so you will see in the declaration she made at the UN General Assembly in September, she said we want to be capable of managing $50 billion by 2030. The only way we will be able to do that is to be equally ambitious around simplicity, speed, and access. We are not known for that. But I can guarantee, hand on heart, in the next year that is what the fund is absolutely working towards, so that we don't have to keep apologising, so that we are also cognizant and acting with the urgency of now. We have 5 years to keep the Earth's temperature hovering around 1.5. We cannot afford to be dispensing funds in 3 years. So the seat at the decision-making table, the local level origination, the bottom-up building of capacity right through to state level, ensuring that countries and governments are working hand in hand with Indigenous people and direct access to funding. They are all things you will see in the communication from Mafalda. They're all things you will see from us in the next year, and we value the feedback to help us know if we're still not getting it right. Thank you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, for Stephanie for expressing that as you did, I think that deserves a huge round of applause. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Simplicity, speed, access, and thank you so much, Stephanie. Do we have questions online or questions from the audience? And I think we have a roving mic here. If you could kindly put your hand up if you would like to. Lady over here.
Hi, I'm Wendy from Raoul Wallenberg Institute. I just want to say to Pirawan that kudos to you. I don't know why it has to be that hard to get what you inherently deserve. But kudos to you and all of your communities that you work so hard to get here. And hopefully we can support you better. But we're talking about fragile and conflict affected situations. I'm just wondering what's your take about Myanmar and what's happening currently, and not just those inside the country, but also like those in Cox's Bazar or those that actually been taking boats out of Indonesia and other neighboring countries. Like, what do you take on that and their fragility and their vulnerability on in climate situations? Thanks.
Thank you. Would you like to direct that question to anyone in particular?
To anyone, really.
Would any of our panelists like to speak to the situation in Myanmar? I think we don't really have from the panel anyone who is from or has recently spent time in that context. I think many of us would recognize that it is, of course, a highly challenging environment, but unless one of our panelists, Piram, did you want to say something?
The situation in our neighbor country is really difficult, and you really cannot access to the information what is really happening on now. And number of road of the arm is crossing and invading the indigenous people land. Indigenous people in Myanmar, they have been doing good conservation by traditional custom, no? And they call it the indigenous conservation and community conservation area, no? That is the good work they're doing, but because of they want to take the resources, it's not really about ethnic thing, no? But it's about the resources that we own in that territory, and they want to take it. And a lot of displacement internally, and neighbor government also don't want to accept those displacement, and that's why you don't know number of the people who dying every day. But I tell you, the bombing is still going on. It's just no news, and the loss. The loss is cannot imagine and estimate anymore, and there is no hand to come and help, even though they call for the UN support. But yeah, there's no help. So it's only internally to get the funding from our own people who live in abroad, and using different channel to send the money to get there through Thailand and then through Myanmar. That's the internal support that we try to help each other. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Parawan.
Can I quickly comment on that? Not from Myanmar, because I'm not an expert in that area, but more from that. We know that more people are displaced by conflict, by climate crisis and conflict now. We know that we have two critical issues. We have the right of people to a safe and secure environment where they want to live, and the right of people to seek asylum should circumstances dictate that. And I think climate action, we are actually beholden to affect climate action in both those locations. And I'm not sure that we grapple as the international community with climate action for internally displaced people or for those who've had to migrate. I think that's an underestimated body of work that we don't know enough about, and I'm not sure. I'm just thinking through our portfolio. I don't think we work in that space, but it's clear that it's a growing space. So no words of wisdom, just an acknowledgement that those two areas are growing, and we need to be active in both of those.
Down the end on the left, please. Welcome.
Hi, Will Worley from the New Humanitarian. I have a question for Stephanie, please. Mafalda Duarte mentioned yesterday at the Peace Declaration launch that the GCF is going to be looking at developing a policy on investing in F-gas locations. Could you maybe specify what's going on there? Is there a timeline for that? And is dispersing resources to these settings contingent on having that policy in place?
Great question, and thank you. We're doing more than looking at looking. I love that. That was a really spin line. No, we know that this is a missing piece of our policy arsenal, and so that's a commitment we make. We haven't put a time frame around it, but we're actually normally faster at developing policy than we are at distributing funds at this point in time. So I imagine that is something you will see from us in the near-term future. And we know that that's a gap, and that's why we talk publicly about the other policies that we have in place, the gender-responsive policy, the Indigenous peoples policy, as the kind of other adjacent policies in that space. To answer the second part of your question, no, it has not stopped us from investing in conflict-affected areas. So Mafalda also in that speech acknowledged the $250 million commitment from the Hardest to Reach project, microgrid-driven electricity supplies for those who lack energy resiliency. So it has not stopped us at all. It's a small portfolio, but our board acknowledged in the last strategic plan that this is a growing area of work from us, and that gives us the green light.
Thank you. Others?
Hi, if you don't mind, there is a question here in the video online, virtual. If you don't mind, I can ask you.
Please go ahead.
All right, so it comes from Connor Baker, and he says, conflict-affected states are often led by governments that are part of the conflict and contributing to it. If we focus on locally and government-led solutions, which I think we certainly should, how do we go about them in these types of contexts?
Thank you very much for the great question. I think, Emmy, you're probably amongst the best place to respond first to that one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think I want to refer back to the financing locally led climate action and why, based on the experiences on the ground, it is really important to diversify ways in which some of these programs take off. And so diversification means thinking about not just it being government-led, but also what are other organized groups and modalities for ensuring that action takes off. Because and in a lot of these places, I do agree, you have challenges where the government is part of the conflict, or the priorities are not necessarily aligned with those of the communities, or just the basic challenge that we know that most of these contexts have governance challenges, or that the legitimacy of some of the governments are questioned, and a wide range of challenges that exist. And so even from FLOCA, we do recognize that it is important that climate financing diversifies ways that action takes place and leverages on the different voices and the different capacities that exist. And so that is why it is important for integration to happen, not just across sectors, but also thinking about the different levels of collaboration that are necessary, the different ways within which collaboration needs to take place.
Thank you. And any other perspectives from panelists on that question before I go to the next one? No? Okay. There's a question down the end on the left, please. Oh, there's one. We'll go one here and one over there. Oh, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, thanks. My name is Peter van Sluis. I'm an expert in peace building, conflict prevention, coordinating civil society platform for peace building and state building, of which Alert is one of our members. So question to Emmy, maybe to elaborate a little bit on what you said about the need for more integrated approaches, and that climate action can potentially be a vehicle to bring the peace component a little bit more to the forefront of that HTP nexus. I would like to hear from you how International Alert does that as a peace building organization. How do you align and coordinate with other actors across the nexus? And then maybe a subsequent question to David, if you allow me. We've seen from the donor reports that the peace component in the HTP nexus is the one that is not taking off as it should. It's not a balanced approach that donors are supporting. How can donors de-silo the financing methodologies and how they provide support to both humanitarian longer-term development, but also the peace component / climate action at the local level, to bring that connection better, to bring that connection better financed, so to say, to make that connection better financed. Sorry.
Nexus related. Emmy first.
All right. Thank you for the question. I think International Alert has long worked with communities in the conflict-affected areas, and I will make reference to Kenya specifically. We work in the north, where we have had protracted conflicts amongst communities for the longest. And so when we started this work around climate change, we had the opportunity to continue the engagement that we have, including with the departments that are responsible for, peace building within the counties, but also at the national level. But because we were working on climate change, we also then started building relationships with the departments and the institutions that are responsible for climate change. And immediately we realized that even within the government structure, these departments and these entities do not speak to each other. And this morning we had a meeting with the Ministry of Interior in Kenya, where the National Climate Change Readiness Program is being rolled out. And one of the things that we want to say has been a success on our part, especially at the national level, is to make a case for the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Environment to work together and to leverage on the capacities and the understanding that they have at their different levels. So we appreciate as International Alert that as humans, as humans I would say, it will always be a fact that we will sieve out those things that we don't know very well. But then we are working towards having the different sides to start thinking about how do we prioritize this which we do not know. And by prioritizing this which we do not know, that we will seek each other out and work on this. And so we are working on bringing these departments together and defining the problem collectively, identifying what are the areas of interactions that are important. And then how then do we define the solution in a way that will give us the results that we seek. And at the end of the day, there is recognition that we all seek the same results. It's just that we do it differently. So that's some of the ways that we have started this. And in the places that we've worked, we've seen quite a good progress in this sense.
Thank you very much. And David, over to you. I think best summarizes really how can we walk the talk better?
Yeah, so I think, thanks for the question. I think part of it is just increasing coordination, and I think that's beginning to happen already. Part of it is sharing lessons on the ground, what is working in places like, in the places where International Alert and others are working. And oftentimes it's humanitarian actors who are in the most vulnerable and most conflict-affected areas, and they're best placed to talk to the peace builders and to talk to other actors and share information and be able to take action. So I think there are funds like SURF that is establishing a new climate action account, and IFRSC and others are establishing new platforms. So I think there's a lot to be done, but there's progress being made.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Nienke Schaap. I'm a colleague of Peter, working for Coordate, and working in programs in South Sudan and Yemen. My question, anyone who wants to give input, but I would really like to hear from Emmy and Stephanie, because we have been working in silos for so many years, decades, and now we have, I would like to know, how can we ensure that these silos are broken now? What is needed to make our climate projects conflict sensitive, and what is needed to make humanitarian and peace-building projects conflict and natural resource sensitive? And I myself am often thinking about gender mainstreaming, and that, for example, Stephanie, you were mentioning that everything that goes out from the Green Climate Fund is first checked if it's gender sensitive or gender transformative. Do you see it possible, and how, to have this similar framework but for conflict sensitivity to climate action? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephanie, can we start with you on that one, please, and then to you, Emmy?
Yeah, great. We we had an event this morning, the Green Climate Fund, where we talked about our vision for the next 4 years. And Mafalda was really clear in that, actually on this topic of fragility, about the need for hyper-localness. And I think, Emmy, you touched on that also before. How do we affect change for both peace outcomes and climate outcomes in communities? We need to be there. And not we, actually. Communities need to enact this change, and that's something that is really critical to Green Climate Fund. That's why we have something called direct access entities, and that's why we talked this morning extensively about needing to build partnerships we have not had in place with humanitarian organisations. That will be a new area of work, and the GCF is looking really closely this year at what partnerships it needs. That whole thing is being rethought. That is one of the tenets of Mafalda's vision. So that partnership is really critical. I get so cross with these silos because many of them are protectionist, driven by we as experts. You know, that development can't be humanitarian, that development can't be climate, that peace is different from climate. Actually, I was just scribbling notes when you were talking about that before, that actually we all seek the same result. So maybe it starts with getting language right, actually, and not being quite so afraid to give up some of our territory. We keep territory because funding's attached to it, and because government funding structures can perpetuate those kind of funding silos, which then lead to working on the ground silos. So I think there's a language issue. I think there's a way that the development architecture consists, and there's also deep questions we need to ask ourselves as climate action, peace and conflict professionals too, about where do we put our boundaries.
Thank you, Emmy. What would you add?
Yeah, I think Stephanie has spoken to most of what I would say, but I think I'll just add that and pick from what Ryan said as well, that the communities don't see the challenges as different. It is their lived reality. Those different things converging together is their lived reality. They've long suffered, from conflict. They've long had these challenges, and so maybe the magnitude is increasing, but then they just see it as increasing. They don't see them as different things. And if I think about when we started working with the FLOCA project, the FLOCA mechanism, one of the things that we learned from the engagement with the communities is that they would speak about these things together, and you could see that they saw them, and how they were linked. But when it came to developing the climate change adaptation plans, then that's where things changed. And then they focused on certain things. And we said, why is this not part of it? And they said, this was not part of the terms of reference. This is not part of the indicators that are sought. And so for me, it also means that while action is required at the community level, at the local level, because they understand the challenges, the way things are shaped is really important at the decision-making level, that we need to be able to define the benchmarks already from that global perspective, act locally, think globally, and structure globally. So it is really important that at the decision-making level, at the level where we define these things, that we are able to see these things in the same way, that we move from the territorial nature that we have to starting to define the change in the ways and in the lens that the communities will see it. And so that was a real experience from FLOCA, that communities defined the issues, and then they went ahead and developed the adaptation plans based on a certain thing that they needed to tick. But who's defined that tick box? It is those who are, and we actually had a discussion during the Africa Climate Summit where we asked these questions, as well as a follow-up discussion with the team from Sweden as well. And it was really an awakening that, yes, at the level where we're making these decisions, we need to see these things in the way that communities are seeing them and facilitate them to take action in ways that will respond to their felt needs. So, yeah, that's what we see.
Thank you. And then we have one final question down the end, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Grace from South Sudan. I just want to ask on the question that the financing is going to be accessible and simple. I want to know what procedures are you putting in place to ensure that the procedures or the language that you use at the top level of the UN agencies is the same as that which is used at the country level. I'm asking this question because we know that the climate effect or crisis is mostly being felt by the that's lowest group of people, especially the women and children. But oftentimes, the resources don't reach those same segment of people. So what procedure do you put in place to ensure that we target the right segment of this group of people in each community affected? Thank you.
Thank you. And that's for David and Stephanie. Who would you like to direct the question to?
I think both.
Can I just ask, is it a question about how do local communities access finance and the languages we use in the documentation around that? Is that the question?
Yes, the procedures you use to finance those local initiatives.
Yeah, and our 200-page documents all in English.
Yeah, no, because what I mean is what you're talking here at the country level is different. So that's what I mean by harmonizing those procedures of allocating those resources.
I'm not sure I entirely understand, but let me respond in a way that I think what you're getting to. If this is a question about country origination, so that countries themselves determine what's needed rather than other external bodies determining what's needed, is that?
I think that's what I meant.
Yeah. I think that's one of the trickiest things, because, and there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is that I don't think the way that development architecture has become established over 30 years, built on the back of often colonialism, has really encouraged local voices to float towards decision makers, and that's something that we need to radically work on. And that means being present in communities, or at least having lenses into communities. And that's what I talked about, the focus of the Green Climate Fund, thinking about how we work in partnership with those who are hyper-local. It's also about the reflection I shared from the President of Somalia saying if there's a Somali in the room, it's from Somalia. You will see that we will begin talking this year, and we have indeed already started to say we are not interested in one-off projects that touch a certain part of a country. We are interested in countries coming to us with that great word, systemic plans around climate action that are owned and signed off not just by government, but by Indigenous peoples and by local communities. How that happens in practice, we still have to work out. Part of our structure that tries to do that at the moment are direct access entities. So those are entities, they're not government. They're normally local organisations that live and work with communities, and they are also able to come to us for funding. That's one of those direct pipelines that gives us the surety that we need at the moment, that we're responding to local communities' wishes and not just those of the elite or those in the government.
Thank you. David, would you like to add? Just very briefly, if you can, please.
Sure, yeah. From an Irish point of view, I think the best way that we can ensure that we're aligned with what's needed on the ground is through our local missions, our local Irish embassies on the ground, particularly in Africa, where we have a large enough footprint for a small country like Ireland, and we give our embassies, our missions, they work with partners and they work with organisations on the ground, so they are better placed maybe than headquarters in Dublin to use the climate finance and to work with partners to develop solutions.
Thank you, David, and thanks for the great questions, and thanks for the energy, and thanks for the great answers as well. So it's now my pleasure to ask Romchat Wachiraratanakornku up to the podium, please, to give some concluding remarks and try and pull some of these broad threads together. So Romchat, welcome. And Romchat, you are the Human Rights, Climate Change and Environment Regional Focal Point at the UN Human Rights Office in Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon, and congratulations that you can pronounce my last name correctly. I am also from Thailand, but as Simon mentioned, I represent Office of the UN High Commissioner here, and I am very humbled by the invitation to deliver the concluding remarks, which in my view, this is more sharing perspective and try to reflect from the human rights perspective. And we already hear from Pirawan and Stephanie about human rights-based approach and the gender responsive. And we can see that a lot of challenges in terms of the channeling the sustainable climate finance to communities that are affected by the conflict are already well documented and include the higher cost, basic safety and security, mortality and lack of available resources. In the UNDP report that published in 2020 is very, very concrete example how difference in terms of the measurement of climate finance per capita, which I would like to repeat again, that in the country which is extremely fragile and fragile state together, average just 8.8 per dollars can receive the climate finance compared to 161.7 per person for non-fragile states that receive and access the climate finance, 8.8 versus $161 per person. So we can see that not only the lack of available resources, difficulty to ensuring national ownership and identifying local implementing partners, as well as access to climate data. That is a lot of challenge going everywhere in the world. That's why I, of course, from the human rights organization, UN Human Rights, we advocate for the human rights-based approach to all perspectives of climate action. So a human rights-based approach to climate finance is essential to overcome those challenges for several reasons. First, I would like to remind all the parties that human rights-based approach means that we need to use the existing international human rights standard to guide the climate policy and programs. And there is a clear legal imperative anchored in binding international human rights instrument for governments and the private sector as well to ensure climate finance governance policies and process are based on human rights standards such as access to information, participation and justice. It embraced meaningful dialogue about the role of environmental human rights defenders and necessity of their protection, adequate due diligence and accountability frameworks. In our work in the region, we have seen the countries that have been affected by the ongoing political conflict. A lot of environmental human rights defenders have to leave the country or shift their focus to look at the political issues that's going on. So all the human rights and climate change policy have to stop. And when the time that there is the disaster impact the countries, we really don't know how many people has been affected or even dying. Second, a human rights-based approach proactively shapes the way climate finance is programmed and guards against the risk of climate finance is used to support projects that result in human rights violations and the exacerbation of inequalities. We have here heard a lot about the new technologies or rare minerals, and we cannot leave and let these happen again in the same way with the conflict minerals that can fuel the conflict in the country. The third one, ensuring human rights consideration into the policies, process and actions of climate funds facilitates policy coherence. Fourth, a human rights-based approach improves the sustainability and equitability of the outcomes of development and climate change policies. This has been already mentioned in the sixth assessment report of IPCC. And the last point, A human rights-based approach helps to unpack the rights and responsibilities of the different actors involved in climate finance, including governments, international and national financial institutions, financial intermediaries, business workers, and other affected individuals and communities to ensure country-driven, gender-responsive, participatory, and transparent climate action. Therefore, we have a lot more work, a more robust examination of these dimensions that is very essential. So we must explore how to effectively prioritize and engage in human rights-based climate adaptation measures, put for mitigation, and address loss and damage in conflict-affected areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Romchat. So it leaves me with about 30 seconds just to conclude by saying, frankly and very honestly, I will leave here with much more optimism than I actually thought I would. I've heard some really positive, strong statements. We have heard some great examples of things that are really working. I was anticipating hearing a lot about protracted crises, the deepening climate crisis, the levels of displacement from climate and conflict-related challenges, but there are clearly lots of opportunities. And I think, just to quote and then plagiarize Robert Chambers, if I may, I think what Robert Chambers, when he was writing about whose reality counts, I think we're starting finally to make some momentum and make some progress around that. And the plagiarism part, if you'll forgive me, is I think it's really also now who counts that reality. And if we can get that bit as well, whose reality counts and who counts that reality, then we'll really get somewhere. As I invite you to give one more round of applause to the panelists and then walk to the exits, I'm hoping by magic some extraordinarily beautiful music is going to start playing in the background. So please take a listen as you get out. And round of applause for our panelists. Really impressive.
Everything that you want for the taking. What's the cost of the cash that you're making? In the black of the ink.
Colleagues, I'll kindly ask you to exit from the right side here, from this door, okay? Because in 12 minutes, the next meeting will start from that door. So please exit from this door.
Where were you before? Over there. Yeah. Very good group. Good. All right. Well done. Nice to meet you.